Okay, I think we can start. We'll let people join as they come. Um, so, hi everyone. So, I've decided to change the class, how it's going again. I did my best effort to make videos and everything, but it's taking me lots and lots and lots of time. So and in the end, I it's very difficult for me to post videos in advance to make sure that you have time to see them and then to go on and do the exercises and everything. So you have a bunch. Still have to watch for most of you the ones on the end of the chapter 2 on Easter Island. So you can do that. Here today, what I wanted to do is just to take to go forward with the material and to give you some stuff to see and do for during the break, and so you would have something to see in the to look for some exercises to do for the next TD when you come back from the break. So a few words about the exam. So it was an experiment for me for two reasons. One, I thought, okay, let's try to make something a bit technical and see how you can think on your feet. And I think most of you got it. Well, for what I've seen, most of you did quite well. Some a bit well, but don't worry, you have time to make up for it in the final, and so there's no panic to be had. I was a bit disappointed by the questions about the fish population. I thought they were easy. My interpretation is that it was a big thing to ask of you to learn all the chapter. Maybe if I just told you, oh, you have to learn like these few pages, then it would have been feasible for you. And I guess even spending that time made you um, not, you know, uh, took away some time that you could have spent on Solo Swan as well. So I'm taking everything into account when I'm grading. So other experiment was to have a multiple choice exam with justification. Usually you have one or the other, but not both. So I thought, let's see what happens if you have both. So the thing is now I have many reasons to say that some answer is not good, either because the circled answer is not good or the justification is not good or the two don't go together. So it would be easy for me to just say, oh, it's not good. But my feeling is that I know that underneath you have some good intuition of what's going on. So don't worry, I'm taking that into account while grading, and I'm going to tell the graders to not be too harsh on you. So yeah, that's not the point at all. It's the point is to make sure that you learn. So yeah, grading is not done. I'm not going to answer specific question about the way the grading is done before it's finished. So yeah, hopefully before you come back from the break, it should be mostly done. And then I can answer some specific questions about it. Same thing for the problem set. Okay, so by the way, could you tell me whether if my image is like is not like the refreshing rate is slow, because that's something that tends to happen. Okay. Yeah, so hopefully before you come back from the break. Yeah, so as I said, this combination of multiple choice and justification means that I have to think very precisely on how the people who grade the exams grade it, to make sure that they don't grade too harshly. So I want to take my time to have some good guidelines to make sure that it's okay. Yeah. So in the final exam, maybe there will be like one reminder question about the Soros-1 model, but you've seen so much of it already that it's going to be really about chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4. Yeah, chapter 3 really. I'm not completely satisfied with your performance, to be honest. I thought it would be an easy answer. Oh, and by the way, so coming back from the break, the people are going to go over the exam for you and see what was the right answers. Okay, so now let's just do something easy today. If I can start. All right. Yeah, I think it's all right. And if I do that, yeah, it's working. Okay, fine. So yeah, that's my experiment on how to deliver the lecture right now. So let's go over the Maltese model. It should be easy for you because in a way, the Easter Island model has the Maltese model in it. So we've seen just a very simplified version of the Maltese model that I showed you in the review questions. So it was not the real Maltese model in the sense that I said, oh, let's imagine that if you have enough food, then the growth rate is that number. And if you don't have enough food, the growth rate is that other number. It's not a super good model because in real life, intuitively things don't go that way. So if you have like a few extra meals, then you can feed like one kid more. If you have 10 extra meals, then you can feed more extra children. So our intuitive sense is that, of course, population growth should be proportional to output per person. So if people are very rich, then they should be able to have many children, and that's essentially the difference we're going to have here. Okay, so just as a small reminder of what's going on in the Maltese world. So it's the pre-industry. Oh, and by the way, if you say something stupid now, I don't know if it's recorded or not, but your face is not recorded, that's for sure. So don't worry about that. And your voice, I don't think it's recorded. I think it's everything I'm recording is here. So, but I'm going to put this lecture on the website after. It's just, it's not as high quality as the videos I did earlier. Okay, so yeah, pre-industrial world. So humans are basically like any other species of animals. So they struggle for life, it's difficult, and they can barely survive. So when they have some extra food, things go well. But then if they have, so they starve a lot. And if they have starvation, then the population declines. There's epidemics, there's all these things. And technological progress is slow. Yeah, and yeah, so that's, yeah, I'm kind of repeating there. So and so yeah, okay. So technological progress and land expansion can bring a temporary increase in living standard, but what we know is that, or what the idea of Malthus is that this temporary gain in the extra food or extra yield from better technology, since it's too slow, then it's going to eventually be captured just by extra mouths to feed, and the standards of living are going to go back down. So that's the message of Malthus. Obviously, so in Malthus's world, the endogenous variable is the population, and it's going to adjust to whatever people have at their disposal. But essentially now the conclusion is that uh, the standards of living or output per person or GDP per capita is essentially going to be fixed or almost fixed. It can change temporarily, but in the future it's not going to be fixed. It's not going to change forever. Yeah, and so he posits two things, two ways in which population cannot grow. Well, the essentially the population could be limited. The population growth could be limited. So hunger, disease, war. So if we have bad technology or if we have epidemics, or if we need more land, then we can try to have more land, but then you lose people in war. And preventative checks, so that's really a creepy one. It's the fact that back then you don't have birth control, so what do? Well, essentially you try to well, either the nice way to do it is to postpone marriage and to have people who don't have kids, and the more nasty ways is to try to have abortions or even worse treatments of children. By the way, right now there is work that was done actually by Esther Duflo in India, and she was talking about this, about the missing children in Asia. So what happens is in Asia right now, so there's a preference to have a boy instead of a girl, and in some places families are poor and they can't sustain very well that many kids, and in China you would have just a control of population, and you have the one child policy that was going on. So then she said, are people aborting or not? Well, not necessarily, but still statistically, you see that there's fewer girls than you should observe. And what happens? Well, sometimes families, they think, oh, the boy is sick. It's a tragedy. Let's bring him to the doctor right away. And if the girl is sick, well, you know, she maybe will recover. And if she doesn't, then it's not that bad. So it's a very sad situation for our girls in Asia right now, but there is still this thing going on in terms of yeah, if you are if you don't have access to other means of birth control, or if you want to just have a boy instead of a girl, that's the way you can do it. So let's go into the Maltese model right away. So I'm just reminding you what Reverend Malthus said. So he was essentially saying that in his mind, population would always grow exponentially. So exponentially means that there's a steady growth rate over time. So here it's imagine after a certain period of time it would double. So 1, 2, 4, 8. But the amount of food that people were going to be able to produce would grow linearly. Well, it doesn't have to be linearly, but essentially it has to be slower than this exponential growth. So that's in his essay on principle of population. And yeah, so essentially his model explains why GDP per capita growth was slow in the pre-industrialized world. And before the exam, I had some question about this, but maybe it's not with your class anyways. Let's go over. So there's a very, very neat paper by Gaylor and co-author about this. And here it is. So what they are trying to see is what Malthus was describing, was that true or not? How can we say that? So what they try to look at is at the following. So they said, okay, so in Malthus's idea, eventually, if we have any extra productivity, it's going to maybe in the short term be a bit profitable for people, but in the long term, just go into more population. So what should we observe? Well, we should observe that societies that had a very good productivity, and here he uses as this the land productivity. I can't remember exactly the scale here, but so it's a log scale of some indication of land productivity. So maybe a yield per unit per square per acres, I don't know, of food. And here, so he's looking at income per capita in 1500s. And in principle, if you have good land productivity, you should have better income per capita because you're able to have more food and to have other people produce more stuff. But what can we observe? Well, we observe that no. Well, there is a no. You really there's nothing there. Really, it's just flat. So you see that. Back then, so it's in 1500s. You had some country like Morocco who had very good land productivity, and still the income per capita was the same as some other places like Norway or Egypt that had very little. Egypt, it's kind of sad because back really back in the like pre-Christian era, they were very prosperous and had very good productivity, but then back then it was in 1500 it was already quite non-productive. Norway, well, it's no surprise that it's in the north. But then the question is, do land productivity promote population instead of prosperity? And yes. So here you have, again, land productivity, and here you have population density. And you can really see that more productive lands yield higher population density. So if people had gained some extra land that was very, very good to produce food, then they would just have many children and they could have a very dense population, but that population would stay poor. So here and it's fun to see how the how the poor countries of today and yesterday are completely different. So back then, many African countries were very rich, or not rich, but had very productive land. India, Burundi, Rwanda, and nowadays they're not very prosperous. So that's a very good indication that Malthus was on the right track. Yeah, and again, this is Gaylor's work. So one thing to note is that, we imagine that Malthus is something that was back then in 1500 and before, but you have to imagine that his ideas have not gone away. And many people even in the modern world still think that eventually, if we are prosperous, it's just a matter of time before population skyrockets and we get poor again. So one of these people was Paul Ehrlich. So he wrote in the in 1968 a very popular book called The Population Bomb. And yeah, his idea is, we are kind of okay, but don't just wait, and population is going to increase exponentially, and we're going to run out of food. And so what he writes here is in the 1970s, so he writes in 1968, hundreds of millions of people would starve to death. Nothing can prevent a substantial increase in the world death rate. Okay, now I've been talking for a while, so input first from some people. So did that happen or not?
It did not happen.
That's a right answer. So no, people didn't, millions of people didn't starve to death in the 1970s. But it doesn't matter. His book was very popular, so he re-edited it in the 1970s. And since people were not dying, then he changed 1970s in the text to 1980s. But people, hundreds of millions of people didn't die in the 1980s as well, but still it was a very popular book. There was the one famine in the 1980s, 1984-85, that killed about 1.2 million people. Have you heard of it? It's so now it's starting to be old because 1980s is far away, but still it was a big deal back then. No, nobody knows where that famine occurred. That's important history to know. So it was in Somalia. And it was caused by. So we can say it was a naturally caused starvation, but in the end, it's kind of caused by humans for the following reason. So back then, they had a civil war in Somalia. And so the rebel army actively prevented people from cultivating in many regions. But still, things were kind of, people had little food, but still had food. But then there was also some climatic event that caused a big drought. And that big drought really just destroyed the last bit of food that people could produce, and then they really starved. But so some climate scientists think that that big drought was caused by the pollution that was happening back in Europe, and actually, so nowadays the skies in Europe are cleaner because there's not as much coal as as we were burning back then. But still, so we still say that this is in history the last naturally caused famine. But you can see that, yeah, there's a civil war component which is human, and there is this pollution that may have caused the bad weather condition that led to the drought and to the famine. But still, that's an important event in the human history because that was the last time that people starved to death. And after that, so, starved to death for non-completely human reasons. There are still famines going on in some regions, but it's intentional, basically. And so, do you guys know why his prediction of hundreds of million people dying didn't come to pass? Why we were able to feed all these people?
We made progress in like agriculture.
Yeah. So, can you be a bit more precise? Yeah, it's essentially it's
I
the
think
right
it's
answer.
about fertilizer. I don't know how you.
Yeah. So the progress started before that, but yeah. So it's the umbrella term is the Green Revolution. So people used to have a hard time cultivating. So if you imagine, like, yeah, in many countries or back, especially in Russia, they had a hard time following the revolution, and they had their scientists really trying to figure out how to have better crops. So, but essentially, one of the most important scientists who really did a breakthrough, it was Norman Borlaug. So here he is. So yeah, so we say he's the father of the Green Revolution. And so he started his work back in the 40s and 50s in Mexico, and then he went to Asia and Latin America. And so he really found out a way to find what are the good crops that survive, that don't die to disease, and don't die to bad weather condition. And you're right. After that, there was also the a very good increase in fertilizer technology. But so it took time to really have this green revolution going on. But so his work was recognized by the Nobel Prize in 1970. So if you are looking for the one human being in the history of humanity who saved the most people, it's him. So people estimate that he saved the life of more than a billion people, thanks to his work in agriculture. And yet, even when he did receive his Nobel Prize for essentially saving people from starvation, this is what he says there. He says, yeah, we're good for now, but now we still have 2.2 people, 2.2 billion, 2 billion. Oh, I copied that, but I'm not sure what he's saying. I think he's talking about billions of people, yeah. Yeah, I think he is. Sorry about that. I thought I had the full quote. Anyway, so he's saying basically that there's a clock ticking and that he temporarily has made very good progress, but then he's saying that 1980, 1990, 2000, humanity is just going to, so population is just going to catch up. So he always has the same idea that Malthus had and that Borlaug, that Paul Ehrlich had, and that Malthus had. So this same idea that, well, we can have temporary gain in yield, but essentially population is always going to catch up. So the only reason to be optimistic is if population doesn't grow exponentially. Then in later years, he said the following. So he said back in my Nobel acceptance speech, so in that speech in 1970, he was pretty bleak. But then he said he thought that by 2000 we would really starve. But then he was more optimistic. He said, "Oh, it looks like we have some hope." So even he became a bit more optimistic. But you can see that it's not guaranteed. We have to be able to make more progress than the population increases. Otherwise, it's Malthus all over again. Okay, so that's the idea. Now let's just see the model. So it should be a pretty simple model for you to understand because we've seen much more difficult models in the past. So this was going to, it should be a small break for your brain. And basically we can solve everything just by using graphs. So here it is. So it's adapted from Clark's Farewell to Home, so a book I talked about in the introduction. So here, imagine that we're in the Malthus world. So in the Malthus world, if you have more food per person, then people have more kids and people die less. So here we see that birth rates and death rates are both function of how much production can people have. So we see the following. So B is birth rate. And it's high if income per capita Y is high. So we write B birth rate is B of Y. And the derivative of B with respect to Y is positive, and Y is small y is production per person. So that's birth rate. And now there is the second thing that we have to care about to know how the population changes over time. It's the mortality rate, M. And it's lower if you have more income per person. So we just write M is M of Y with dm dy smaller than 0. So the higher the output per person, the lower mortality is. And the law of motion of population is simply going to be, so you write capital P for the total population. P, so we had L in the Solo-Swan model. Here, let's just say we have P population. So it's capital P. So P dot is dP dt, which is equal to B minus M multiplied by P, the number of people you have. So one other way to see it is just the growth rate of population would be P dot divided by P would be equal to the birth rate B minus the death rate M. Okay, so that's so it's we're having the model in continuous time. Could be not continuous, but it's fine to do it in one or the other. It doesn't change anything about the interpretation. And so that's the law of motion of population. And of course, the thing is, here I didn't write it, but I could say that it's B of y, M of y, and it would be P dot of y then, because everything is function of output per capita. And then, so that's how population is function of output per capita. So that's the first part of the model. But then the second part, obviously, is that output per capita is function of population. And what Malthus has in mind is that it's not true that output per capita increases exponentially as much as population increases exponentially. Output per capita doesn't follow the growth rate of population. So we say that income per capita or output per capita is low when P is high. So essentially y, small y, is equal to capital Y divided by P. So capital Y is the total output. And it's going to be F of P. Why I write F of P, it could be F of P and other things like how much land you have, how much capital you have even. But what we're going to assume is that the rest is fixed. So we're stuck in our country and we can't invade other land. And also it would be a function of technology. But now it's really the only thing that we care about. But yeah, it's going to change later. But for now, we just write it this way. So y is equal to f of p divided by p. So we can write small y of p. And the thing that we want is that if p increases, then y, small y decreases. So dy of p dp is smaller than 0. And some sufficient condition to have this result here, or this not result, but this feature of the model, or this assumption, is that f has decreasing returns to scale in p. Yeah, so now let me just try to see if I can do what I wanted to do. Oh, gee, oh man, okay. Oh man. Okay, let me try to open it again. Okay, I think that works. Okay, so imagine that you have f of p. So if you have, for instance, let's say it's a Cobb-Douglas function of population and land. So we have that y equals f of p t, and this is equal to p to the alpha and, oops, sorry, and t to the 1 minus alpha. So here t is land, for instance. And alpha is between 0 and 1. Oh yeah, by the way, I've thought about something too, is I use American mathematical notations in the class because, you know, when you start reading scientific literature is the only notation that you see. but I'm aware that you guys maybe have in mind the French mathematical notation. So I would write it this way if it was written in the French notation. So it would be 0, 1. Yeah, I like this. Okay. So if some notation that I'm writing, you're not sure, then ask me, please, because of course it's going to mean that other people are not going to be sure.
We cannot read what you have written.
Ah, Jesus.
It does not appear.
Okay, I see what's going on. Now it's better?
We still can't see the full equation.
Oh, that was my experiment, but okay. What could I do? Okay, I know what to do. Here. And okay. All right. Yeah, okay. So what I was saying is that, so here T is land, and you can see that P is population, and alpha is between 0 and 1. And what I was saying is that, so this is my notation, but yeah, if you're in the French notation, it's this one. So if I write something that's unclear to you, for instance, during the class, then you should ask me, because obviously in the exam I will assume that you understand the mathematical notation that I'm writing. For instance, when I write arrow like this, like x tends towards 0, for instance, so this means x approaches 0 but is very close to 0. So it's a shorthand for limit when x tend towards 0. Okay, it's a shorthand for that. So keep that in mind. So I think I saw one in the exam that essentially it seemed that the student was not totally clear about this. And of course, if it's infinity, then it's infinity. Okay, that's the parenthesis about the notation. Yeah, and then obviously what's going on with this is that then I have small y equals p to the alpha t to the 1 minus alpha divided by p. So it's going to equal to p to the 1 minus alpha. Right? And you see that then dy dp is smaller than 0. So this is the way you think about this function. All right. But obviously, if I multiplied both p and t by the same proportion, then capital Y would increase by the same proportion. Okay. Now back to our model. And now don't, yeah, so now first of all, let me show you what this looks like. So this graph here is pretty much like what I drew the first in the first class. So you see that there's just decreasing returns to adding population if, for instance, land is fixed. And then what we infer is that it must be, well, not what we infer, but what we want is that essentially if population always increases, then the output per population is going to decrease, unless there is something else. So unless you add better technology or better land, for instance. Okay, so it's not too, nobody is too confused at this point, I imagine. If you have questions, so you can stop me anytime. Okay, so now just to tell you what's coming so you don't get too confused. So what we're going to look now is at a graph where we are going to have on the x-axis, not p, but small y. So we're just going to flip this graph, flip the axes like this, okay? And this is going to allow us to look at everything that's going on at the same time in a very easy way. So, but just to tell you in advance so you don't get too confused, all right? Because normally I would draw it on the board, but yeah, here it's better if I just show you the final version. So here it is. So why do I want to have this little y here? Well, because I have b of little y, m of little y, and I have here little y as function of population. So I can basically put the two graphs on top of each other, and I can look at the whole model at once. And then we can think in our head what may be going on quite easily with the whole model. So just as a reminder, here the state variable is actually population, but it could we could also say it's y. Partially it would be y because it will be linked to population. But what you're going to see is that many different value for big P can be compatible with the same value for y as we're going to see. Okay, so now let's just imagine. So what's going on? What's going to go on in this model? How is it going to adjust? Well, first of all, the steady state here is in terms of, if I write it in terms of small y, then we can more or less guess that it's going to be at a situation in which the birth rate is equal to the death rate, such that population does not change. So here, the birth rate is b of y here, and it's going to have to equal the death rate, m of y. So just by looking at their crossing, then I know the steady state value of output per capita. So if output per capita is greater than this, then population increases because births are higher than deaths. And here, if output per capita decreases, for some reason, I have bad crop yields this year, for instance, then people start dying. So in the long run, there's only one situation in which the model will not change, and it's that situation there. So that's pretty neat. That gives us our value of y star, and then our value of y star gives us the value of population. So then we have essentially solved our model. So I can just give you a formula for b of y, m of y, and f or f of p, and f of p, and you can solve the whole model. It's very easy. Yeah, so just to see what may happen, for instance, if we are out of equilibrium. So imagine we are out of equilibrium. So for instance, if population increases, I hope that's not, let me just check if, okay, so imagine population decreases, yeah, that's better. So population is here at steady state. and population decreases. So we're going here. Let's call this P prime. So for some reason, there was something bad happening, and some people died unexpectedly this year. So then what's going to happen? Well, P went down, and by P going down, I can deduce that, oh, since there's this inverse relation between Y and P, then I can deduce what is going to be the output per capita this year. So it's going to be this. So I get this new output per capita. And then what happens if I have this better output per capita? Well, I'm temporarily richer and people are able to produce more food and blah, blah, blah. What happens to population? Well, to know that, I just follow this line. And here I have stacked this graph and I have, again, a small y here. So essentially, I see what's going on in terms of population growth. I see that B of y is higher than M of y. So I have a positive, oops. Yeah, so what I could write is population increases. And what does that look like? Well, population increases, so P has to go back to P star. And as long as P is under P star, then I'm on that side of Y star. And then what happens over time is I go back to my equilibrium output per capita, and I get back to P star. All right, so that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying, it's not complicated. So you have seen, so the Easter Island, especially with the later versions with all the complications, is complicated enough. So this one is essentially an easy one to understand. Question about this? So the only tricky thing maybe to understand is that here I have so here I had y as function of p, and here the only thing I did is flipped and I have p as function of y. But so if once you just see that it's the same negative relation is just flipped, then you can understand all the dynamic. So no issue with that. Yeah, you're experts now. Okay, so let's see if you understand. So here we can have a little quiz, and now it's a real little quiz. So you can go on the website and answer it online, and we can correct it together. Did I write the? Oh, I didn't write the address. I think it's.
Is it number 4 on the?
Well, let me just see. Oh no, 4 is Easter Island again. So it's, I think it's 5. Yeah.
I think it's 7.
Oh, okay, yeah, it looks like it's 7. Oh, yeah, because I finished. Okay, yeah, it's quiz 7. I finished with this quiz last year. That's why. Yeah, so this is going to be a bit like we just did. So if there's a sudden instantaneous inflow of population, how is P dot? So how is population going to change? A few moments later, how is going to what's going to happen to P in the long term? If there's a instantaneous innovation, so that's now you have to think a bit more. What happens to f of P? That increases f of P. What happens to y immediately? What happens to y in the long term? And is there a way to get y, so output per capita, higher than the steady state output per capita permanently? So it looks like a contradiction to ask this, because essentially the steady state output per capita is something that we should have permanently. But could you imagine something that you could do to always keep a better so population more prosperous than it would be otherwise? Oh, I'll look at the chat. Oh, I've seen a lot of other. Okay, no, that was just.
Will you post this recording on your site later?
Yes, I will post the recording. That's my intent. So, but I've never done it. I've never used Zoom with recording, but yeah, I hope it will work.
Okay.
Are there going to be any videos on this part of the program, or is just the lecture of today?
Yeah, that's the thing. See, it takes me too long to make the videos. Well, I would have liked to always have videos, but it's yeah, it's very time consuming. So yeah, it's going to be the lecture of today. Plus, I'll post this on YouTube. Not YouTube, but yeah, YouTube, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
So one question was, I don't understand why it's a negative function. Yeah, maybe I can go back to. Yeah. Um, okay, so the question is, why is this a negative function? Yeah, so what happens is if you have more people, but nothing else changes, so you have the same amount of land and the same amount. So imagine that I'm on my farm. I was with my wife, and it was the two of us, and we could work, and it was quite good. And then we have 10 kids, and they only have the same amount of land to produce. So obviously, they are being 10 kids, they are able to produce more than we could just produce, me and my wife by ourselves. But still, per capita, so for two people, you had the whole farm to be able to produce. And now you have 12 people in total on the farm. So obviously, per person, you have less food than you had before. So this is the intuition for this function there, right? Of little y as so you see that output can grow if population increases, but output per capita decreases, because if we are 10 people, then per person we have less food. And then here it's flipped, but it's exactly the same logic. The idea is, if output per capita is that value, what is how many people is that compatible with? Well, if it's if the output per capita is quite large, then it has to be that we are, say, only 2 on the farm. But if output per capita was small, then it would mean that, okay, we are like 10 people, so that's why it's small. So that's the intuition. Okay, so let's go ahead and grade this this thing. So yeah, quite successful. I think maybe I didn't removed all the previous answers, but so it gives us a larger sample. So if there's a sudden instantaneous inflow of population, how is the PDT a few months later? So this is like if it's like in the exam when I say, oh, there was something that happened. So in the exam it was fish died. So then next period, what is the growth rate? So it's like the same kind of question is just after this shock that I gave, here is the inflow of population. How is population changing? So most people got it right. It's the PDT is negative. So this is the PDT is P dot. And why? Obviously, because if there is more population, then output per person is lower. And if output per person, so it used to be at steady state, therefore the birth rate and death rate were the same. Now, if output per person, so if output per person is lower, then it means that birth rate is lower and death rate is higher. So we are able to sustain fewer newborns and more people die of starvation. So negative was the right answer.
But since it was just a few moments later, I don't understand why is it negative, because it's just after the shock, no thing long term.
Yes. Okay, so let me go back to the graph. Oh, sorry. And, yeah, so here we are. And then population increases, okay? So there's a sudden inflow of population. So we were at P star, and now we are prime here. And then the question is, so what is a few months later? So just after P prime has increased suddenly. So now I'm asking, where is the population going? So of course, there was this thing that just happened, but now I'm asking right now, as a result of that happening a few moments ago. So now where is the population going? So is the population increasing even more or then starting to decrease? So to answer that, you have to look at your graph. So here, P prime is there. So then I get this value of y prime. So of, yeah. So then output per capita is lower than it used to be at steady state because I have too many people on the farm. And then what happens in the long run? Well, in the long run, they're going to have to start dying, or population is going to decrease. So we can see what's going to happen. So here the death rate is higher than the birth rate. So then population is going to go down. So let me see if I can draw some arrow. There. sorry. Is that clearer?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is what's going on. Okay, next question. Is there, yeah, RP is going in the long term, then yes, of course. So people are going to born to be, so births are going to be smaller than they used to be, and deaths are going to be higher than they used to be, until we go back to P star. So back to P star. Yeah, most people got it right. Then more difficult. If there's a sudden instantaneous innovation. So I didn't put innovation in the production function, but so it's just, you can imagine that I have a in front and you have A that increases, for instance. What is the impact on Y, small y immediately? So yes, this is good, larger than before. Why? Because right now I would just became more productive, but right now I have the same population that I had yesterday. So this means that yes, it's going to be as productive as before. I mean, it's going to be more productive than before because I just have better population, better population, better technology, so better output per person, and person hasn't changed. Yeah, and then what happens in the long run? Then yes, equal to before in the long run. That's wow, you're pretty good. I'm happily surprised. So most of you got it right. So yes, we're going to go back down, but yeah, it's not clear from what we have been saying. So you have to really be clear. You have to look at to draw the curves yourself and to make sure. So that's what we're going to look at. And then finally, is there some way to get output always higher than Y star permanently? If so, suggest how. Oh, and then, oh, I saw. Decrease birth rate, improve technology. Okay, we can see all these things. Improve technology is something that I had in mind. So who, if that the person who said that, or maybe it's between among of you. So if you add some small thing, then it could, because we've just seen that if we have some one-off increase in technology, then in the long run we are going back to Y, to the long run steady state level of output per capita. So then to have this increase forever, what do we have to have? Well, we would have to essentially improve technology forever. Higher death rates. Okay, let's think about all these things. No, there isn't. Technological frontier. Yeah, but back in the day, the technological frontier was having a cow that pulls the equipment for you instead of you yourself pulling it. So yeah, technological frontier was not that good. Yeah, so I think these are essentially the good answer. Encourage people to have more children. I don't think that would be right, because that would be actually even worse. Because more people on the farm, then it means that you're 15 on the farm. So then output per capita is going to be even lower. AI, yeah, sure. Yeah, constant innovation. That's exactly what I was saying. Okay, so let's just go back to our slides. Yeah, so this is what happens if you have a population that increases suddenly. Then, yeah, instead of having this output per capita, then you have this new output per capita. So you have death rates that are higher than birth rates. So P has to go back down, and until you go back to this permanent level of output per capita. Pretty depressing situation in which you can never be prosperous. Oh yeah, so this is one famous example of Malthus in action. So can somebody tell me what happened there? If you know your history. I'm going to give you a hint. It has to be to do with something that we're currently living in right now.
The Black Plague?
Yes, epidemic. So you see that there was a great number of people who died. So I think it was, so the Black Death was in 1349 in England. And yeah, between 40% and 60% of the whole population died. So obviously much worse than the coronavirus, but yeah, so coronavirus is bad, but think of how nasty that was back then. And then what can we, what happened there? Why did real wages increase? Somebody has an idea?
Since population decreased so much and there were much fewer workers, and so real wages increased, but instead of increasing the life standards, they just started to have more children, so real wages decreased again.
Yes, exactly. But what we can see though is it takes time, no? So that's the thing about when I say long run. So you see how long it is. So it's not like 10 years. It takes time for people to be born and for the situation to go back down. And actually what happens is, what happened in England back then is, yeah, exactly what you said. So there was a shortage of workers, especially in farms. So then landowners that were like landlords back then who rented the place for laborers to work, then they started running out of people and they had to pay them more. So then the king didn't understand what was going on. So it was Edward III back then, and he thought, oh, that's sedition. How come these people ask for better wages? They shouldn't. They should just take whatever we give them. And so he obviously didn't understand the supply and demand back then. So he said it's sedition to to do that. So he had voted the Ordinance of Laborers to declare that real wages or wages had to be at the same level as what they were back before. But then did it work? Well, no. That's the problem with supply and demand and economics. You can't fight it, or it's very difficult to fight market forces. And even if he said it's against the law, then people just say, oh, I'm going to work somewhere else where there's not this law. And if you really want me to stay here, I'm free to move whatever I want. So it took a super long time for wages to go back down. So it took like 200 years. And and it's really when population started going back up that then the real wages could go back down. So I think we're 2 minutes left. So let's just see briefly what happens to when we have technology. Oops, sorry about this arrow there. So this is technological innovation. So imagine that I am here at steady state, and then I invent something. So a better, I discover that it's better to save a piece of land for this year, for instance. So then what happens to output? Output goes up, and it means that output per person will go up. So it's like if I'm by myself on my farm, and then I'm more productive. So for any value of P, output per person is going to be higher than before. So you have a translation, or it can change shape, but basically this P of Y is going to go to the right because Y increases for the same amount of population. What happens then? Oh, we're more productive. Birth is higher, deaths are lower. But then what happens is, okay, population has to increase. So population increases until you go back to the same place you were before, that the birth rate is equal to the death rate. And we are back at the same output per person. So it's very sad. Even if I invented something very nice, it's just temporary. I just have to wait for a while, and we're just more crowded. So that's exactly the situation that we saw earlier, or exactly the situation we had here. So temporarily we're better, but then in the long run, it's just good for population density, and in terms of output per person, it goes back down to where it was before. Yeah, so that's the thing. So I think I'm going to, I'm just going to check in there's some question. Yeah, Black Plague. Good. Okay, so yeah, we're more or less out of time. So I'll post that on YouTube, and we'll continue next time. So during the vacation, you can go on and start the TD3 with exercises on that. So they are not too difficult, I think. All right. So yeah, any question just before we finish? No? Okay, so have a good break, everybody, and stay safe, and don't catch any nasty disease.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Have nice holidays.
Bye.
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 Bye.